the ages. Sometimes families just can't seem to get along. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you've experienced that. I don't know. I hope that you haven't. Maybe you've gone to a Thanksgiving dinner and you're the black sheep. I can see a few of you filling that role. Bob. Me. I asked for it. I'm giving him a chance. I paused. I gave him a chance. But there's these tensions. Remember, Isaac was the child of promise. The blessings of God are going to be bestowed upon Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. For through them comes the fulfillment of the promise, which is Jesus himself. Tension. Why can't we get along? Well, we can go on down then because the text in Genesis 25 begins to look at Isaac's descendants. You might remember Isaac and Rebekah, and now it's time for them to have a family. God's promise to Abraham was what? Your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky or the grains of sand on the seashore. You know, right now he's got Isaac. And what was read for us earlier, I read again, beginning at verse 21. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it is so, why then am I this way? And so she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb. 2 peoples will be separated from your body. And 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Interestingly enough, those you ladies who have given birth, you remember that first kick? And you went, oh, what was that? You know? I can remember with our children, and you know, they're getting bigger and they're kicking Gretchen, and it was fun to just kind of watch her belly do this. I thought, and she didn't think it was great. You know, where are they playing soccer inside of me? You know, this is painful, but I thought it was really cool to see, you know. Rebekah is having twins. You know, we got a set of twins here at church. Rebekah's having twins, and it's not just that the 2 of them are playing soccer in there, but do you notice what the text says? They struggled within her. Even before they're born, these 2, who we know as Jacob and Esau, are going at it. Even from the womb, we have a precursor, a scene that sets the stage for what their entire lives as brothers will be like. It's not like, you know, they were born and they were great together in the nursery and they played semi-nice in the nursery, but then they got to be teenagers and went at it. They started even before they were born. You can go on and read. You'll find the stolen birthright. Did you notice that what God told Rebekah was the older shall serve the younger? That's not how it was in the ancient culture. The firstborn has all the rights. And that would be Esau. When those 2 were born, Esau's born first. He gets the birthright. But if you read the story, and maybe you remember it from Sunday school or vacation Bible school or something, Esau's been out hunting. He's a hunter, and he comes back and he's hungry. It's been a long day. He probably hasn't gotten much. He hasn't eaten. He forgot to take a granola bar in his water bottle. And he comes back, and there's Jacob. Jacob's kind of mama's boy, okay? He's good in the kitchen. And he's cooking. He's got a stew going on here. And Esau looks at it and he smells it and he goes, give me a bowl of a stew, would you, brother? And Jacob goes, I'll sell it to you for your birthright. Now you have to wonder what in the world's going through Esau's mind. You know, does he think I'm going to die if I don't eat a bowl of stew? But he agrees. He sells his birthright to his brother for a bowl of stew. Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew in verse 34, and he ate and he drank and he rose and he went on his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Harsh words. Interesting statement. Later, when Isaac is old and death is nearing, something very similar will play out, a stolen blessing. The words that a father would speak to the child at the end of his days were very important in that Jewish culture. Elsewhere in Genesis, you hear Jacob speak blessing upon the 12 sons. And each has to do with the identity of the tribes that will then populate what comes to be known as the people of Israel. But Isaac, his eyes have grown dim. I'm looking at the time. I hate this. I had cataracts removed, so now I can't see if I wear these, and I can't read if I don't have them on. I'll get used to it sometime, I guess. Isaac can't see very well. He's grown old. And he has his son Esau go out to hunt and make him that good wild game that Isaac just loved it. Maybe some of you like to go deer hunting or pheasant hunting or whatever. And Isaac's just, he's ready for some of that. So Esau goes out to hunt. Well, Rebekah, remember, Jacob is mama's boy. Rebekah tells Jacob, we're going to fool your dad. And Jacob goes, that ain't going to work. Esau's big, brawny, and hairy. Me, I'm kind of like Bill. And she says, that's all right. We'll cover your arms with animal skins. That's interesting. And I'll fix some of your dad's favorite food. And that's what happens. And Jacob goes in, and Isaac's actually surprised. He says, you're back so quickly, my son. How could you have gone out and found game and prepared the game and the meal? And I was just lucky today, Dad, Jacob says. And Isaac, a little skeptical, he smells, he feels. He goes, the voice is that of Jacob, but the burliness is my son Esau. And he speaks a blessing upon him. The covenantal blessing. Abraham, Isaac, Esau? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, because Isaac speaks the covenantal blessing upon Jacob. Well, Esau comes home. He's got some wild game. He prepares it. He brings it into his dad. His dad says, the blessing is gone. And you hear Esau weeping. He's crying. He is heartbroken. Is there not a blessing that you can give to me as well? You actually read about this in chapter 27, a little bit farther than our prescribed text for the day. And here's what Isaac in chapter 27, beginning at verse 39, says to Esau. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, away from the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve. But it will come about when you have become restless that you will break his yoke from your neck. Isn't that interesting? Brothers, I've told you before that in the latter years of her life, my sister and I were estranged. I could go into the issues. I care not to, but she passed without us ever reconciling. And I bear that pain in my heart to this day. I assume that I will to my grave. Here were two brothers. Chapter 27, verse 41. So Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, The days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. That's pretty strong, isn't it? He took my birthright. He took my blessing. I can't stand him. And when Dad is gone, Jacob will be too. And why can't we all just get along? Well, there's a third picture of relational tension. It's in chapter 26. Remember that the descendants of Abraham at this point are still sojourners. They're wanderers. They're Bedouins by nature. But God has led them to this land that ultimately is the promised land. But it is not theirs yet. They're wanderers. They're aliens. They're immigrants in a foreign land. And when you're reading in chapter 26, you find that Isaac, due to a famine, takes his family to the land of the Philistines. That would be along the Mediterranean coast. And there, this is just odd. Did you pick up any bad habits from your parents? Anybody here pick up any bad habits from mom and dad? Okay. I ask my kids all the time, and there's 6 of them. You'd think I'd had luck with at least one. I said, why did you get all your mom's good qualities and all my bad qualities? I see myself reflected in my kids in all the bad ways, and Gretchen reflected in them in all the good ways, which, okay, maybe that's good. Isaac, when he's amongst the Philistines, tells Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, Rebekah is my sister. Where did he learn that? Those of you who have been in Genesis with me, Abraham pulled that stunt twice. You remember? Like father, like son. And it comes about as you read the story. Abimelech, the Bible is so kind in the English. Abimelech saw Isaac caressing his wife. They were making out. Okay? He wasn't giving her a back rub. They're making out. Okay? And Abimelech goes, that's not your sister. Why did you lie to us? You could have brought tremendous punishment from God upon us if one of our men had made her his wife. And Isaac said, well, I was afraid you'd kill me to have her. That's exactly what Abraham had said. Twice. But because of his what? Deceit, in verses 16 and 17, we read, then Abimelech said to Isaac, go away from us. You're too powerful for us. And Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Go away from us. Lying to people is a good way to destroy a relationship, isn't it? Deceit just is not a good thing. We try to tell our kids not to lie, but sometimes they've heard us lie. Well, Isaac moves to the land of Gerar here, and it's interesting what begins to happen. Let me read for you verses 19 through 21. This is the 4th one if you're keeping track of chapter 26. When Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found there a well of flowing water, the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with the herdsmen of Ike, saying, the water's ours. So he named the well Esek, because they contended with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over it too. So he named it Sitnah. And he moved away from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he named it Rehoboth. For at last the Lord has made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land. I simply put down here that there's a disagreement over water rights. Now, I was a kid in the 60s and a teenager in the 70s, and my dad liked Westerns. It didn't matter if it was John Wayne or Robert Mitchum or any of the rest of them. We were watching Westerns. And what were the cattlemen always arguing about? Water rights. because you got to have water for the livestock. And someone would be shooting up someone. But then John Wayne would ride in and settle the score, and it always ended happy, right? McClintock was a great guy, wasn't he? That's what's going on here. Remember, these are Bedouin herdsmen. And they need water. And they dug a well, and the locals said, it's ours. So they moved on, and they dug a well, and the locals said, it's ours. And they moved on, and they dug a well, and finally, there was a place that Isaac could say, we can stay here and be fruitful in the land. Man, people will fight over property. People will fight over possessions. That's why we have laws against theft and robbery. And we have property lines. I never made a big deal of it. When we lived in Iowa, we owned our home. The backyard went down. There was a fence. And the people that we bought the house from, the man actually showed me where there were property markers. Well, the fence was about 1 foot into the neighbor's yard. Okay, no biggie. I mowed that little section, and we just knew where the property was. And the neighbor back there came to me one day and said, would you mind if I planted a tree to mark the property line? And I said, no problem. Here are the property markers. If you want to pay for a tree to put in my backyard, that's cool. He put it about 6 feet into my property. And I never made a big deal of it, but I thought, man, if this was a Western, I'd be getting my 6-shooter. I'd be calling you out at high noon. And Jimmy Stewart ain't here to save you. You following me here? Why do we have locks on our doors and on our cars? Why do we have LifeLock on our internet? Because there's always someone ready to take your stuff. And it causes tensions. Well, there's something interesting in the midst of this before I get to the fifth one. In chapter 26, verses 23 to 25, says, then he, this is Isaac, went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night, and he said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham. So Isaac built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants dug a well. Do you hear the voice of God in the midst of all the strife? Don't fear. I'm with you. You know, tensions can cause our heart rate to go up and our blood pressure to go up and our stomach to hurt and our head to hurt. And then God speaks and says, don't fear. I'm with you. The covenant that he had made with Abraham, he restates with Isaac. And later he'll restate it with Jacob. Hold on to that for just a minute. The fifth one is at the very end of chapter 26. We're back to Esau. In verses 34 and 35, when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they brought grief to Isaac and Rebekah. Ever had tension with the in-laws? Sorry. I'm grateful that my in-laws have always been gracious toward me and we've had good relationships. But I know people. Remember the old song, Mother-in-Law? That can get you in trouble. Esau, like any young man, wants to get married. He takes 2 wives. But he takes 2 Hittite wives. Do you remember how Isaac and Rebekah got together from a previous sermon? Abraham had his servant go all the way back to the east because I don't want Isaac marrying the women of the land who are what? Pagans. They don't know our God. Go back to our people and take for Isaac a wife who knows God. Esau didn't do that. Esau married two women, two pagan women, two women who didn't know God. It created issues within the family, and it brought grief. It broke the hearts of Isaac and Rebekah. It doesn't mean they didn't love Esau. It's just as so many parents experience, their hearts hurt for their son and the choices that he had made. Isn't that interesting? 5 different relational issues in a chapter and a half. Why can't we all just get along? Well, the solution lies in an open embrace of and a total surrender to the Prince of Peace. That's Jesus, in case you didn't know. That's why I said hold on to that for just a minute. The restatement of the covenant between God and Isaac. I am the God of your father Abraham. He identifies himself. He tells you, this is who I am. I'm the God of your father. Because of that, you don't need to fear, Isaac. I am with you, and I will bless you. Where is our peace in the midst of strife? Where is our peace in the midst of tensions? It's found in an open embrace of and a total surrender to the Prince of Peace, who is Jesus. In his book, The Reason for God, the late Tim Keller this is kind of an apologetics book, deals with the questions that people who take issue with Christianity, tries to answer a lot of those questions. I highly recommend this book. In one chapter, he's talking about the church is responsible for so much injustice. Okay, he says it's Christians' fault that there's so much injustice in the world is the question that he's addressing. And he spends about 5 pages talking about how, no, it's Christians who have brought reconciliation between warring parties time and time and time again throughout centuries. I want to share just a couple. Actually, I'm going to share about 4 or 5 of these, but very quick. And this is from Tim Keller, okay? The social historian Rodney Stark writes, although it has been fashionable to deny it, anti-slavery doctrines began to appear in Christian theology soon after the decline of Rome and were accompanied by the eventual disappearance of slavery in all but the fringes of Christian Europe. When Europeans subsequently instituted slavery in the New World, they did so over strenuous papal opposition, a fact that was conveniently lost from history until recently. And finally, the abolition of New World slavery was initiated and achieved by Christian activists. Christians began to work for abolition not because of some general understanding of human rights, but because they saw it as violating the will of God. Older forms of indentured servanthood and the bond servants of biblical times had often been harsh, but Christian abolitionists concluded that race-based, lifelong chattel slavery established through kidnapping could not be squared with biblical teaching, either in the Old Testament or the New. And so Christian activists such as William Wilberforce in Great Britain, John Woolman in America, and many, many others devoted their entire lives in the name of Christ to ending slavery. Now this is interesting. I didn't know this until I read this book. The slave trade was so tremendously lucrative that there was enormous incentive within the church to justify it. Many church leaders defended the institution. The battle for self-correction was titanic. And when the abolitionists finally had British society posed to abolish slavery in their empire, planters in the colonies foretold that emancipation would cost investors enormous sums and the prices of commodities would skyrocket catastrophically. This did not deter the abolitionists in the House of Commons. They agreed to compensate the planters for all freed slaves, an astounding sum up to half of the British government's annual budget. The Act of Emancipation passed in 1833, and the costs were so high to the British people that one historian called the British abolition of slavery voluntary econicide. Destroyed their economy, half their budget. But it was more important. I find that interesting. Move forward, at least in our nation, a number of years, and we come to the 60s. I was just a kid. My brother fought in Vietnam. I was busy playing with Billy Blastoff. Anyone ever have a Billy Blastoff? Just me? Little robot guy? Ah, you got one! Yes! You know, he had a little battery-operated backpack. He went to the moon. I'm sorry you guys were so deprived in your childhoods. But I do remember vaguely the TV coverage of race riots in Chicago, hostilities. Another classic, this is back to Tim Keller. Another classic case of this is the civil rights movement in the United States in the mid-20th century. In an important history of the movement, David Chappell demonstrates that it was not a political, but primarily a religious and spiritual movement. White Northern liberals, who were the allies of the African American civil rights leaders, were not proponents of civil disobedience or of a direct attack on segregation. Because of their secular belief in the goodness of human nature, they thought that education and enlightenment would bring about inevitable social and racial progress. Chappell argues that black leaders were much more rooted in the biblical understanding of the sinfulness of the human heart and in the denunciations of injustice that they read in the Hebrew prophets. Chappell also shows how it was the vibrant faith of rank-and-file African Americans that empowered them to insist on justice despite the violent opposition to their demands. Thus, Chappell says there is no way to understand what happened until you see the civil rights movement as a religious revival. That's an interesting take. But you think of the sermons of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness is a mighty stream. That's Scripture. Well, we move forward a little bit. It's the 1990s, and in South Africa, apartheid is all the rage in the news. And that nation makes drastic changes. Drastic changes. Back to Keller. After apartheid was abolished in South Africa, everyone expected a bloodbath in which former victims would take violent vengeance on their persecutors and former oppressors would defend themselves with force. Instead, Christian leaders like Desmond Tutu set up the remarkable South African Commission for Truth and Reconciliation in the mid-1990s. Its name expressed its principle and mission. It invited victims to come forward to tell their stories publicly. It also invited former perpetrators of oppression and violence to come forward, tell the truth, and ask for amnesty. No side was exempt from appearing before the Commission. The Commission heard reports of human rights violations and considered amnesty applications from all sides, from the former apartheid state as well as from the African National Congress. Though not without its flaws and critics, the Commission helped bring about the transition to a majority rule with far less bloodshed than anyone could have expected. Do any of you remember the fall of the Eastern Bloc and the Soviet Union? In the late 20th century, the Catholic Church in Eastern Europe refused to die under communism. Through patience, candles, and crosses, it began the chain of events that brought down all those totalitarian regimes. The Polish priest, Jerzy, and forgive me, I cannot pronounce his last name, through his preaching and activism, led the movement for a free trade union in communist Poland in the early 1980s. When he was murdered by the secret police, 250,000 people came to his funeral, including Lech Walesa, whose solidarity movement would help bring down the communist government. Many of those who went to his funeral marched past the secret police headquarters with a banner that read, "We forgive." The Christian underpinnings of the resistance movement were unmistakable. Archbishop Oscar Romero of San Salvador was appointed because of his conservative Orthodox doctrinal views. In his new post, he saw irrefutable evidence of chronic and violent human rights abuses by the government. He began to speak out fearlessly against it. As a result, he was shot to death in 1980 while saying Mass. One more. The famous Lutheran martyr, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who, as you know, is my personal favorite theologian, was pastoring 2 German-speaking churches in London when Hitler came to power. He refused to stay at a safe distance and returned to his country to head up an illegal seminary for the confessing church, the Christian congregations that refused to sign an oath of allegiance to the Nazis. Bonhoeffer wrote the classic The Cost of Discipleship, in which he critiqued the religion, the church of his day. In Echoes of Jesus and the Prophets, Bonhoeffer revealed the spiritual deadness and the self-satisfied complacency that made it possible for so many to cooperate with Hitler and to turn a blind eye to those being systematically marginalized and destroyed by the Nazis. Bonhoeffer was eventually arrested and hanged. Do you notice a common thread in any of these? It's the people of God seeking to bring the Prince of Peace into the midst of human tension and conflict. The people of God taking the lead in reconciliation. Which is interesting because in the book of 1 Corinthians, the Apostle Paul says that we have been given the ministry of reconciliation, that we are ambassadors of Christ, appealing to people to come to Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Keller concludes his chapter. Why mention all of these examples? They are evidence that Dr. King was right. When people have done injustice in the name of Christ, they are not being true to the spirit of the one who himself died as a victim of injustice and who called for the forgiveness of his enemies. When people give their lives to liberate others as Jesus did, they are realizing the true Christianity that Martin Luther King Jr., Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and other Christian voices have called for. That's out of The Reason for God by Timothy Keller. Again, I'd encourage you. I'm going to draw this to a close with well, let's just put it out there. We're getting close to the Christmas season. Some people are already there. Some of you probably have a tree up. Anyone have a tree up? Do you really? Okay. It stays there all year. Okay, I'm not talking about the one planted in the front yard. So, some of you can't wait for Halloween to end because, man, I get to decorate for Christmas now. I love Christmas. The incarnation, the birth of the Son of God. What an amazing time, folks. Some of you are already there. I'm not quite there yet. I want Thanksgiving first, at least in my holiday schedule. But in the Christmas season, one of the things that we often do is read from Luke chapter 2 and sing in our Christmas carols that which the angels spoke. Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill toward men. The Prince of Peace. Whether it be with your children with your spouse, with your boss, with a coworker. If it be with someone who disagrees with you philosophically on the meaning of life, or disagrees with you across the political aisle on whatever issue of the day is at hand. Whether it be in nation against nation, individual against individual, the answer still lies with Jesus. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among men with whom He is pleased. Not just in the season that is now but a month away, but always. Within families, Isaac and Ishmael. Between siblings, Jacob and Esau. Amongst people who live and populate the same land, though they are for different ethnicities, Isaac and the Philistines. Whether it be with people who might have a different morality than us and might even try to take from us that which we claim as our own, such as Isaac and the people of Gerar. Whether it be with our own children, when they marry someone that you don't necessarily think they should marry, such as Esau and Judith and Basemath. Rather than accentuating the tensions, rather than having your sister die while you're still estranged, rather than creating division, let us bring the Prince of Peace to mankind. Would you stand as we sing?